Kindness versus weakness. Kindness. To really embrace the concept of kindness means for us to be friendly, considerate, and compassionate towards others as well as towards ourselves. Kindness is only truly kind if our actions are considerate and compassionate to everyone involved. If we are considerate and compassionate to others at the expense of our own safety or sanity, then there is a problem. We are either being manipulated, or we have blurred the concepts of compassion and codependency, or both. At a minimum, if we are continually putting others ahead of ourselves to the point where we are being used, abused, exploited, lied to, cheated on, stolen from, or feel exhausted or crazy around certain people, then our beliefs about how we deserve to be treated, as well as our boundaries, need some work. Many people who find themselves perpetually hurt or let down by toxic people tend to start to feel bitter and jaded. This is because they are operating from the standpoint that if they are nice to people, that people will be nice back, and this isn't always the case. Weakness. Weakness means to lack strength. In terms of interacting with others, especially highly manipulative others, it often means lacking strength of boundaries and standards, and letting others steamroll over us, while thinking that if we can just be kind enough to them that they'll stop, and will eventually treat us with all the kindness and support we have given to them. You can't people-please your way into being treated well by an abusive person. All this does is make you more of a target. Now, I'm not saying that I think partners of narcissists are weak. They are not. They have been manipulated, and their kindness has been exploited. They have been through hell, and it takes a strong person to go through hell and come out on the other side. However, they often don't realize how strong they are, because once they leave hell, they often collapse and feel like they can't go on. What they don't realize is that healing takes time, and it's more of a marathon and not a sprint, and that they don't have to go on the rest of this journey alone. Once the fog of manipulation starts to clear, and they start learning about their standards and boundaries, that's when the magic really starts to happen, and over time they get in tune with their inner guidance and where their boundaries are. The result of this is that they learn to balance their kindness with boundaries, the result of which is that they become some of the most powerful, self-actualized people out there. New story. Once I realized that my mother was continually preying on my kindness, I realized that the solution wasn't necessarily to stop being kind. It was that I needed to get comfortable with having boundaries with her and stop feeling guilty because I stopped giving in to whatever she wanted. At first I felt really mean by standing up for myself, but if me being kind to her meant that I wasn't being kind to myself, then something big was out of balance there. My family life with my husband is a lot more in balance now that I won't let my mother continually borrow money, stay with us whenever she's been evicted, or yell at us whenever she feels like it. I would never have tolerated being treated like that by a total stranger, and it's sad that my own mother would treat me like that, and that I thought that was somehow okay. My kindness is no longer my weakness to be exploited by people like her. Candace. Acceptance versus allowance. Acceptance of problematic behavior. Acceptance of problematic behavior doesn't mean that you are okay with it or that you have to continue to allow it in your life. It means that you are accepting that this is their behavior. You might still hope that they might change down the road, but you aren't holding your breath. When, and only when, we accept someone else's behavior for what it is, can we start to see the situation clearly and then start anticipating how they will most likely act. Allowance of problematic behavior. Allowance of problematic behavior is when we realize that a person has problematic behavior and then allow them continued and open access into our lives, even though their behavior is disruptive, disempowering, damaging, or destructive. Allowing problematic behavior to continue tends to either come from a place of feeling ground down and hopeless that things will ever change, or it is a sign that standards, boundaries, and self-worth need some work. Many people tend to keep toxic people in their lives out of guilt, fear of being alone, or fear of what they or others might say or do, or obligation. However, your life will dramatically start to improve once you start keeping people in your inner circle based on how they treat you, instead of how you feel about them or based on what relation they are to you. News story. I've become really picky about who I let into my inner circle these days. I've spent my life surrounded by abusive and manipulative people, and I guess I thought that was normal. My brother has been in and out of jail multiple times for drugs and violence. I kept thinking I needed to keep him in my inner circle because he was my brother, even though he continually stole from me and caused a ton of disruption in our life. The last straw was that he made a general threat about hurting me and my family. Now that I see his behavior clearly, I accept that he is who he is, and I respond accordingly. I do still have hope that he will change, but that's more for his sake. With him threatening us, that was the final straw, and I'm done. I'm not going to put my family at risk and let him cause more damage because he's my brother, or because I hope that he might someday change. I accept him for who he is at this point in his life, and now I keep him at a safe distance. It's sad things have to be this way, but it is what it is. Daryl. Self-worth versus hurt feelings. Self-worth. Self-worth is a person's confidence in themselves and in their abilities, and it makes up an important component of their self-identity. Self-worth is who we think we are and what we think we are capable of. Hurt feelings. Hurt feelings are what we commonly get when someone says something hurtful about us or about our abilities. There is no shortage of people with inconsiderate, rude, or abusive behavior out there, and hurt feelings will happen. However, we can make the conscious decision to let hurt feelings be hurt feelings, and not to let those hurt feelings negatively impact our self-worth. Other people can think and say what they want about us, and we don't need to accept their opinions about us as truth. Even if their opinions are truth, we don't need to let them impact our self-worth. Easier said than done, I know. A helpful way that I've found to do this is to visualize keeping your self-worth and hurt feelings in two different buckets. This technique can also be a great way to undo a lot of what that abusive person said to you. So if you are hearing all of the hurtful things that they told you, imagine yourself taking that comment out of your self-worth bucket and putting it into your hurt feelings bucket. It's important that we keep these buckets separate and practice paying attention to what it feels like and how we tend to act if our hurt feelings bucket is full and has spilled over into our self-worth bucket. We can separate out the different marbles into the right buckets so we don't let another person's opinion of us negatively influence who we think we are or what we are capable of. If we are getting feedback from a person who is abusive or a chronic liar, then it's important that we realize that their opinion isn't going to be accurate, because abusive people tear down others in order to make themselves feel better. As the saying goes, rudeness is the weak person's imitation of strength. Healthy, happy people don't go around destroying others. Only abusive people do. Abusive people tend to focus on the qualities of another person that they are jealous of, or that they know will foster the deepest insecurities in the other person, so that their abusive comments have maximum impact. Please don't let these kinds of people determine your self-worth, because the only way they know how to feel secure within themselves is by destroying others. Don't give them the satisfaction of destroying you. Dig deep and find your fight to reclaim your self-worth, and remember, the best revenge really is living a great life. News story. My ex continually put me down in ways that were very subtle. He'd plant seeds of insecurity about my weight, my job, and how attractive other women were. I never thought this was verbal or emotional abuse. I always thought he was just being brutally honest, and that there really were all these things wrong with me. All his hurtful comments I took to be truth, and I allowed them to really impact my self-esteem and self-worth. I now realize that it's normal to have hurt feelings when someone is abusive like that, but I can make the conscious effort to not let it impact my self-worth. Janice. Reacting versus responding. Reacting. Reacting to something means to give a knee-jerk, reflexive reaction to someone's behavior or to a situation. They take an action, and then we reflexively take an immediate reaction. These reflexive actions happen without thinking, and it can, and often does, happen to most of us, especially if we are emotionally triggered by something, which we may or may not realize that we are being emotionally triggered by. Responding. Responding to something means to give a thought-out response to something. There is the action, and then there is our planned out response. It takes a good amount of self-awareness, self-control, and practice to shift our behavior from a reaction to a response. Once you realize that you've been stuck in a loop of reacting to someone else's behavior, then you can work towards breaking that cycle. Doing so can be so empowering. It's a great feeling to see when a person is baiting, provoking, or otherwise trying to drag you down into the mud to wrestle around with them. And it's incredibly empowering when you can sidestep their drama and dysfunction and not even miss a beat. It takes a lot of awareness of their behavior and practice anticipating what they are going to do and how we respond to it, but you can get there. If you keep practicing responding, it will eventually become your new normal, and then there will come a time when you will think it's strange that you ever did anything different. The added benefit to this is once you really get this skill down, awareness of what it is, and anticipate their behavior and plan your response to it, you will be able to transfer that skill to every other situation that you come across. And you will be able to do this so quickly, and possibly even effortlessly, that you don't even experience the situation as problematic. Because you've become so nimble, you are easily able to adapt and adjust your response. It's kind of like how an Olympic hurdler runs and jumps over those hurdles. It takes a lot of practice, but once they get it down, they really get it down, and they just sail through the air and jump over those hurdles like they're nothing. News story. My ex-husband used to play this game with me, although it took me a while to realize that's what it was. He'd provoke me with saying things he knew would set me off, like blaming me for his cheating, or telling me that my father should have beaten me more when I was a child, for example. And then when I would explode in anger, he'd sit back and act cool, calm, and collected, and then play like the victim of me, that I was being so mean and abusive to him. For years, I thought if I could just get through to him as to how much he was hurting me, that he'd stop bringing up certain topics and learn to fight fair. Then I began learning about narcissistic abuse and realized he was hitting all my pain points intentionally so I would react, and so he could play the victim. Once I saw it as a game, I realized I needed to stay calm, stay in control of myself and the situation, and get away from him before he began pushing my buttons. Now, when I have to see him, which is not very often, I respond to him. I don't react. It's kind of funny because he gets all flustered and upset when I don't react. Samantha. News story. One thing I have discovered about myself is that being around disordered people and becoming the direct target of their insanity will trigger me into an emotional flashback. And with this sort of experience, there is no working through it, unraveling it, decoding it, and then slowly over time learn how to stop going back into the flashback experience. Because I received the sort of advice that I could learn how to respond, then I actually believed I should be able to be around the disordered. I felt I should be able to be exposed directly to their attacks of rage and fury, their accusations and their manipulations, and that I should be able to stand there and respond calmly, and I should not go into a flashback that paralyzes me with terror and fear, and that cuts off my ability to communicate with my middle brain or my frontal cortex. But being told that I should be able to learn how to do this, stop going into the flashback, remain completely in control of my emotions, and be able to simply and calmly respond, left me feeling completely and deeply shame-filled because I really cannot stop the emotional flashbacks when they occur. When someone starts yelling at me out of the blue, with no warning and for no reason, then I am instantly hijacked into a flashback, and no amount of delving into the past or into the underlying issues, or even spending millions of dollars on therapy is ever going to change this, or is ever going to help me. I will never be able to remain calm, take a step back, and cock my head to the side, detach emotionally, and wonder why they are acting so crazy. I am quite literally hijacked by my amygdala and become mute and paralyzed and terrified with fear. So what is the answer? What is the cure? I have had to learn to accept and to be patient and understanding and forgiving of myself for not being able to get on top of these paralyzing emotional flashback experiences. And I have had to face full on with no flinching or avoiding it that I personally am not capable of doing or getting to the state of not being triggered into reacting. my reaction being a sort of mute, terrified paralysis. The only thing I can do is to cut this person ruthlessly out of my life and never ever see them again or have any contact with them ever again, and to forgive myself 1,000 times a day for not being able to tolerate their behavior emotionally, and respect and honor that I simply cannot be around anyone who exhibits extreme disordered behavior towards me, and in particular anyone who exhibits unprovoked and unexpected rage. So just some thoughts on people who are permanently scarred with CPTSD is that they may not ever be able to respond, and it's nothing to feel guilty about. The wonderful news is that as long as I stay away from them, I live a peaceful, calm, flashback-free life. Lucy. Feeling appropriately emotional versus feeling emotionally triggered. Feeling appropriately emotional. Feeling appropriately emotional is having a feeling that is in proportion to what's going on. It's normal to feel sad or depressed when a relationship is over. It's normal to feel anxious if we lose our job or don't have enough money in the bank to pay bills. It's normal to feel happy when we come home and see our pet. It's normal to feel distrustful of others when you've gotten out of an abusive relationship, especially one that included emotional and psychological abuse. It's normal to feel angry and enraged at being used, abused, and to have had your good and trusting nature exploited. Feeling emotionally triggered. Feeling emotionally triggered can come across in different ways for different people, but usually it's the feeling of being disproportionately emotional to a situation. My guess would be that the vast majority of people out there have some sort of emotional triggers. Perhaps they've never thought of them this way, most likely because if these are long-standing triggers, we might think we just feel this way and that there's nothing more to it. When a person feels this way, they might not know why. They just know that they are experiencing intense emotion. For example, a person might feel really angry, tightly wound, or depressed around the holidays, or they might hate being around children, or perhaps they get upset walking into a church or hearing other people discuss religion, or seeing a car that looks like their ex's and feeling sad or mad, which leaves them in a funk that might last all day or even all week. I want to point out that there's a difference between a preference and a trigger, and the difference is that a preference is more emotionally neutral. So, for example, a person might not want children, or they might not be a fan of religion, but if the mere mention of these topics brings out a fight or flight response, feeling defensive, angry, and wanting to fight about it, then there is more there. Preferring one thing over another, such as preferring to not have children, or to not be religious, normally leaves a person feeling more emotionally neutral. Although emotional triggers can be really unpleasant, and most of us spend our whole lives trying to run from them, they can actually be very revealing, as they are a signal that there are some emotions a few layers deep that need to be resolved. The good news is that once an emotion is resolved, its power over a person dissolves rather quickly, because we are rarely, if ever, truly upset by the events themselves. It's our perceptions of the events and the meaning that we assign to them that determine how we feel. If we want to instantly change how we feel, a great way to do that is to change the meaning we assign to different events. And the meaning we assign to different events, in large part, comes from new understandings that we can form. Oftentimes these new understandings come from getting new information, and in terms of narcissistic abuse, I highly recommend reading my first book called Start Here, which covers all of the basic terms, concepts, frequently asked questions surrounding narcissistic abuse. It is a crash course guide of sorts for getting people up to speed with figuring out what's going on and why. Silent treatment versus cooling down. The silent treatment. The silent treatment is a form of verbal abuse and is designed to punish and groom a person into acting a certain way. The silent treatment involves withholding communication, affection, or attention from a person with the intent to punish them for acting a certain way and grooms them to never act this way again. Generally, a narcissistic partner will give the silent treatment if their partner questions or challenges them in any way and to any degree. Even asking the simplest of questions to which they don't feel they owe their partner an answer or explanation can result in the silent treatment. The person on the receiving end of the silent treatment is left to twist in the wind, wondering when and if the other person will reopen communication with them. Freezing a person out like this is abusive, as it creates intense and unnecessarily psychological and emotional anguish in the person experiencing it. It damages trust, honesty, and communication, and leaves the person who is experiencing it to start walking on eggshells. From then on out, they've learned that they can't bring up concerns or certain topics, or else their partner will withhold communication and or affection from them. Cooling down. Cooling down is when a person gets upset and needs their space. It may be seen as similar to the silent treatment in that one person is upset and doesn't want to talk to the other, but their desire not to talk isn't to punish the other person. It's either an effort to stop the fighting that is going on, or it's to collect their thoughts so they don't say anything they'll later regret. Cooling down involves open, honest, sincere, and solutions-oriented communication, which includes letting the other person know they plan on reopening communication in a reasonable time frame so the other person isn't twisting in the wind. Needing time to cool down and not to talk to another person is okay, especially if a person is concerned they are going to say something they are going to regret, and knowing that you need some time to cool down shows a healthy degree of self-awareness. Needing time to cool down could be expressed in a way such as, "I'm really upset right now and need some time to gather my thoughts. I'll call you tomorrow." Or, "Can we talk more about this tonight, tomorrow, this weekend, when I see you?" Or, "I'm done fighting about this. We aren't getting anywhere. I love you, but I need to go for a walk right now. Can we talk about this when I get home?" This way, the conversation is put on pause. The other person isn't left to twist in the wind because a time frame is given, and there's the reassurance that the issue will be brought back up and resolved. In a relationship with a narcissist, many issues are never resolved. The partner is left to twist themselves into an emotional pretzel, trying to forgive, forget, or otherwise move past all the hurt that their partner has caused in an effort to keep the relationship going. And because these issues aren't fully resolved, they tend to keep coming up. Either the partner brings them up whenever they fight, or they continue to try to keep stuffing their emotions down, and these emotions are coming out in physical ways, such as weight gain or loss, drinking, drug use, depression, anxiety, stomach issues such as diarrhea or constipation, chronic inflammation, etc. If you are having any of these issues, it's worth examining the relationships with the people in your inner circle. It's amazing the havoc that unprocessed emotions can cause on both emotional and physical levels. And it's also equally amazing as to how quickly people can start to heal from these things once they either leave that environment or start to effectively understand and process their feelings. This all might sound really hippie woo-woo, but it's true. News story. My ex gave me the silent treatment twice. Both times were because I disagreed with him. The first time it happened, he claimed he didn't mean to and that he was just cooling off, and he agreed not to do it again. I told him it was okay if he needed time to cool down, but to please let me know when he did want to reopen communication so I wasn't twisting in the wind. The second time he gave the silent treatment again, it was for something small. I disagreed with him over something political. He told me he needed several weeks before he'd want to talk again. I gave him the time, which in hindsight I shouldn't have, because even though he was still giving me a time frame, he was still trying to punish me for disagreeing with him. I dated abusive men before, and I really thought he was different, because he seemed to want to work towards a solution, but he was actually the worst, because there was never a true solution. It was all only another level to his game. It took me several years to see the truth, but once I did, I broke up with him. I've found that while a relationship does take work, it should take the work of trying to be treated with respect. That should be obvious and already there. Danielle. News story. Though my ex, who I now believe was a psychopath, did not do much in the way of direct overt abuse, his main crime was living a double life and keeping it completely secret from me, he did employ the silent treatment on occasion. But here is one stark difference to me between the silent treatment and cooling off. Whenever he would decide the time of being silent was over and he would return, the reason for the silent treatment was never discussed or alluded to. We were simply to pick up where we left off, and there was no discussion ever about what caused him to do it or what could be done to prevent it happening again. In a way, I had to learn how to live as if the silent treatment had never even happened at all. So this lack of discussion to me is an indicator that it is silent treatment and it is punishment. If you cannot even discuss upon their return why they left or why they stopped talking and walked out in the first place, and you have to pretend like nothing ever happened, then it's punishment, not cooling off. Lucy. No contact versus the silent treatment. No contact. Going no contact is a defensive strategy in which a person cuts off all contact with a person who has crazy-making, toxic, or abusive behavior. Going no contact with someone who is agitating, provoking, pot-stirring, deceitful, manipulative, or abusive is a normal and healthy response to problematic behavior. You don't owe anyone an explanation for going no contact with problematic people in your life, especially the abusive person. This is your life. It's not a democracy. Other people, especially ones who don't have to live with the consequences, don't get to vote on what you do and don't do. Many people who have a narcissist in their life are either told by well-intended but misguided people or by the narcissist that they are being mean or abusive by cutting off contact with them. This is not the case. You don't need to be someone else's verbal, emotional, or physical punching bag. It is normal and healthy to have deal-breaker behavior for what we allow into our lives. Taking actual steps to actually break the deal is the action part of having a deal breaker. It's what enforcing a boundary looks like in motion. And yes, it can be really hard at first. And yes, there will be no shortage of people out there who will give you generally well-intentioned bad advice to reopen contact because this person had a bad childhood, or is a parent, or is a family member, or that you should be more compassionate, or that they must be truly sorry because they now have found God or therapy or rehab. It can be really hard and incredibly angering to feel that you continually have to defend your boundaries when you are the one who is the target of abusive behavior and are only trying to defend yourself and or your family. It can help to anticipate and rehearse different scenarios as to what others will say and to come up with a planned response so you aren't caught off guard emotionally and then get angry, lash out, or fall into a depression when the topic comes up. An example might be something like, family member, Mom wants to visit you for the holidays and she wants to stay for a month. You. That's interesting. So what are you doing for the holidays? And then just switch the conversation to something else. Or if they push the issue, you could say something like, I've decided I need to distance myself from her. She's been abusive to me my whole life and I'm done being treated like that. Plus, it's not okay for her to treat my kids like that either. Or you could simply say, I'd rather not talk about this, and stop the conversation in its tracks. Family member. She's your mother. You need to forgive her. She's not getting any younger, you know. One day you will be sorry you treated her like this. You. Believe me, no one is sadder than me about not being able to have a relationship with my own mother. But I have to cut contact because she's abusive toward me. I've put up with being treated like that my whole life, and I'm done. I'm not going to continue to let her cause damage to me or my family. If she were a man, I'd have divorced him by now. If she were a boss, I would have quit. If she were a friend, I'd no longer talk to her. Just because she's my mother doesn't mean that she can be abusive towards me. Do you understand how twisted that is? That my own mother is abusive? The one person who should treat me with love and respect grinds me down and is abusive, and I'm the one being told that my behavior is out of line. It's not. This is me having healthy boundaries for myself, and me looking out for what's best for my marriage and my children. People need to treat me and my family with respect, or they are not welcome here. I know you don't like my decision, but I'm asking that you respect it and not bring up any of this again. But keep in mind, you don't have to defend yourself either, and a simple, I'm not open to discussing this, will suffice. The silent treatment. The silent treatment is a form of verbal abuse and is a grooming behavior that is designed to groom or teach a person how to behave. It is generally done by emotional manipulators if they are confronted about their problematic behavior or challenged in any way, even ways that were unintended or only happened in their mind. The silent treatment is used to punish a person into submission and is lifted after the abusive person decided their target has been sufficiently punished. Whereas no contact isn't a punishment, it's self-protection. It isn't intended to be lifted, it's intended to be permanent. Although many targets end up breaking no contact because they feel addicted to their abuser or guilty or mean for setting a boundary. Low contact. Low contact is where a person decides that they can't or don't want to limit contact with a problematic person, and so they have limited contact with them. Low contact is what many former spouses of abusive people do when they have children together, or if a person has an abusive or problematic family member that they feel obligated to stay in contact with. Low contact is where a person still has some degree of a relationship with a problematic person, but the level of their relationship depends on what you are comfortable with, or the bare minimum that is necessary, as is often the case when children are involved. Deciding what your boundaries are all starts with getting to know yourself and knowing what's workable for you. I've found that a good way to start with this is to reverse engineer it, meaning ask yourself, what do I need to do in order to keep myself safe and sane in this situation? And then you work your way backwards from that point. So for example, if you realize that spending a week with family over the holidays is always stressful and ends in fighting, then something needs to change. Perhaps you realize that about 5 hours with certain family members is your limit before tension ensues and the yelling starts. Then make 5 hours your limit. If you are flying to see family, you could stay somewhere else and then visit them until you are ready to leave. Then you can go back to your hotel or friend's house or other family member's house or what have you. There is no reason to stay with family for a week if everyone is fighting and miserable the whole time and you wind up frustrated to tears, stressed out, or sick. Maybe you decide to take a family vacation to some neutral place where everyone has their own space and can do their own thing. If a situation is not working for you, then come up with some ideas on what would work and try that instead, and then continue to adjust accordingly. Change is always somewhat difficult and intimidating, even if it's for the best. So when people start drawing boundaries, changing things, especially in families, things rarely go over well at first, especially if the family dynamic is dysfunctional and full of people who don't have boundaries, and they are all used to walking on eggshells around all the elephants that are packed into the room. A great way to tell the degree of dysfunction in your family is based on how you feel. Do you go home sick, or does going home make you sick? If it's the latter, then it's time to examine your boundaries and standards and to reevaluate your approach if necessary. So for example, let's say instead of your abusive mother staying with you and your family for 1 month over Christmas, you decide that is too long and that it'd be better if she stayed for 3 days. Then you try that out. If that doesn't work, perhaps you decide to fly out to visit her for a week and stay in a hotel so you can get a break when you need one. If that doesn't work, then perhaps you move to giving a phone call only. And if that doesn't work, then perhaps a card in the mail. And if that still doesn't work, then maybe you go no contact. What you decide to do is up to you, and only you have the right answer for what that is.